And we have organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, mad, because of the number of car fatalities caused by drunk drivers. None of us in this room would say, oh, I encourage people to drink and drive. We think that's a brilliant idea. But now, phone use, particularly texting, has surpassed drunk driving as a cause of motor accidents and car fatalities. Cell phones. Nobody has any emotion about it. This should tell us something about our relationship with cell phones. 75% of adults admit that they text while driving at least sometimes. So, and 56% of parents check their phones while they're driving because they want to make sure their kids are okay. So just really quick, let's talk about this really quick. We have this thing built into our brain that says we need to survive. And we do things to increase our chances of survival. So when we're driving a car, it used to be old school. We would do things to make sure that we survived. We might listen to music on the radio. But we were told, always look out for the other guy. My dad told me things like, look at their tires. Because wherever their tires are pointed is where that car is coming. And you get about a second of advantage by looking at the tires. But, this is what we were taught when we were learning how to drive. Assume that the other guy's an idiot. And assume after 10 o'clock at night the other guy's drunk. This was classic advice. Because after 10 o'clock at night, something like a third of all drivers are drunk. So you just assume that they're impaired. Now, two things have happened. You've added to drunk driving impairment by texting while driving. But in addition to that, we as a society have taken what used to be primary in our thoughts, survival, and now that is number 2 in our thinking, to communicating with other people on our cell phones. That has become the primary driver in our brain. So we will take the survival mechanism and tell it to be quiet so that we can make a text message to somebody while we're driving a car. That should wake us all up. That is one of the ways our brain is changing because of the cell phones that we have. The survival is not as important as communicating with a friend. Let's see, Generation M. That would be Grant's generation. Generation M for media. It's the media generation. That's the generation that you guys are raising right now. Use electronic media a lot. In fact, total media use, total digital use, average per day, as of 2010. That's the last Kaiser Foundation study. The Kaiser Family Foundation does these studies periodically every 10 years. They're fascinating, they're fabulous, they're great studies. And 2010, 7.5 hours a day of media use by teenagers and children. 53 hours a week, including during meals. In fact, only 1/3 of families have rules about media use at all. It's become such a big part of our culture. So, Facebook, they say that the average person will spend 4 years of their life just on Facebook. Yeah, life's too short for that. The American College of Pediatricians says that technology is good and bad. When they look at screen use, we're going to say screen use is different from hands-on use or business use. Screen use of technology. Overuse, they use this language. They said it poses grave health risks for children. Imagine that, American College of Pediatricians. Grave health risks for children. That's strong language. They say that excessive exposure to screens often results in, let's hedge, might result in, lower academic performance, increased sleep problems, obesity, increased behavioral problems, increased aggression, lower self-esteem, increased rates of depression, increased high-risk behaviors. So they suggest that parents limit screen time for their children and parents limit screen time for yourself. What we see, the classic complaints just a few years ago were about things like internet pornography and sexting and addiction to texting. Right, so let's do this. With internet pornography, it's a huge problem in our society today. It's a huge problem for families today. It's a problem. The average age of addiction beginning age 11. 11 years old, average age for getting hooked to internet pornography. Huge problem. The female equivalent, not that females can't get addicted to pornography, but the female equivalent typically is texting. And so there are a roughly equivalent number of older children, younger teenagers, that text 4,000 times a day or more. Do the math of that. 24 hours a day, they are available for texting and will text 4,000 times a day or more. What these have in common is dopamine. Anything that's addictive is dopamine related. So if it's gambling or drugs, alcohol, dopamine related. It's the dopamine impact on the brain that causes the addiction. But things like that, we relegate to people 18 years old and older. We figure when you become an adult, you can get addicted if you want, but we protect children from it. But the dopamine impacts of our easy technology on our cell phones, social media particularly, texting, for example, we will put into the hands of a child as young as 6 and say, there's nothing wrong with it. And yet they're highly addictive. So we're going to look at that a little bit more. Your brain is plastic. Now, what we mean by that is that your brain changes. And it changes until you die. That you can improve or denigrate the performance of your brain all through your life. And it adjusts to whatever situation you're in. And the way it performs adapts to whatever environment that you're in. So someone who comes from an environment that is abusive or poverty-stricken or whatever it might be, their brain functions at a survival optimum way of working. That's what a terrible sentence. But the brain adjusts to work optimally in order for the person to survive. Somebody who comes from an environment that's like Ozzie and Harriet raised them, and there's food on the table and food in the fridge, and Dad's got a job and he pays his bills, and you got 2 cars, and everything's easy. Mom and Dad are nice and they're supportive, and they come to all your games, they cheer you on, all that kind of environment. Their brain works differently, and their brain becomes wired to thrive and seek success. So brains adapt to the environment that you're in. We think of memory, for example, like a closet. That we have an idea, we want to remember it, so we open the closet door, we put it in the closet, we close the closet door, and whenever we need it, we come and get it. Like a refrigerator, we get the food out of the fridge. We think of memory like that. Brain doesn't work like that. That the brain changes whenever you learn something. The brain changes when you practice a skill. The brain changes. The wiring in the brain changes. The brain creates these freeways, these highways, that the more you do something, the stronger these neural connections, these highways in the brain get. Think about riding a bike. Once you learn how to do it, it's easy. Think about anything you do repetitively. Driving a car, you don't think about it. You just get in, you just do the thing. So things we do repetitively and without thinking about it is because the brain has created these neural connections that just do it effortlessly. It gets better at whatever you do. But it gets better at whatever you do. So people who have temper problems, it gets better at whatever you do. People who have bad habits, it gets better at whatever you do. The brain gets better at what you do. And that's why we call them habits. So it becomes very important that we figure out what habits we want to have and feed, and what habits we want to starve and get rid of for us to achieve our goals. So because the brain is plastic, we see adjustments, we see changes in the brain when there's been abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, traumas of a variety of kinds, combat things, brain turns to the survival stuff. And then we try to treat people for that, try to help people reset their brains back to normal levels of functioning. But for a time, at least, maybe for their entire life, it's not working at normal levels of functioning, it's working in survival levels of functioning. So what does it do to our brains in an environment of internet, cell phones, smartphones, overwhelming amounts of information, rapid changes, and rapid rewards of dopamine in our brain without any challenge? So we used to get the dopamine with things like we'd achieve something. You'd actually get that merit badge. You'd actually make something that tasted great. You'd actually finish your homework and turn it in. You would actually take a test and get an A. You would actually build something. You'd do something that mattered, at least to you, if not to a bunch of other people, and you would get your dopamine reward. You would feel good about it. Now you get the same dopamine reward by simply doing this. That's it. That's all it takes. You do this, and you get a dopamine reward. You get a text message, you get a burst of dopamine. You answer the text message, burst of dopamine. You look at Facebook, burst of dopamine. So our society is changing, and our brains are changing along with us. Let me give you